Hello and welcome into another episode of Locked On Wolves. Today on the show, all about AJ Lawson, the Timberwolves' newest player. He signed a two-way deal with the Wolves late on Tuesday. We're going to break down what he brings to the table. He had a fantastic summer league for the Dallas Mavericks. We'll talk about that, what he did in college, and the elements of his game that will be beneficial for the Wolves this year. Plus, more on Seth Partnow's top 125 players over at The Athletic, why Rudy Gobert ranks ahead of Karl-Anthony Towns and Anthony Edwards. It's all coming on the show. Welcome in. You are Locked On Wolves.
You are Locked On Timberwolves, your daily Minnesota Timberwolves podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Hello and welcome into the Locked On Wolves podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. My name is Beecken. I'm the host of Locked On Wolves. Happy Wednesday, everybody. Happy Hump Day. And a big thank you for making Locked On Wolves your first listen each and every day. Of course, this show is free and available everywhere, including YouTube, as well as all of your favorite audio platforms, Apple, Google, Spotify, Odyssey. Anywhere you listen to podcasts, you can find Locked On Wolves. You can also follow on Twitter at Locked On T-Wolves and at Beecken, with two B's, two E's, C-K-E-N. Today on the show, the Timberwolves have given us some news to talk about. They've signed a two-way player, their first two-way signee. Of course, Nate Knight still has a qualifying offer out for a two-way, so very likely he ends up being the second one. But their first official two-way signing is AJ Lawson. I want to break down his game, what he brings to the table, and why I'm excited to see him with the Wolves, why I think he'll actually get a shot to play a bit this year with Minnesota. And then we'll get into the top 125 over at The Athletic and Rudy Gobert's ranking and Seth Partnow's top 125 players. But let's start with AJ Lawson. So AJ Lawson is a 6'6" wing. He went undrafted out of South Carolina a couple of years ago. And he actually started his college career as a point guard. If you go back, and he's 6'6" now. I guess I don't know if he grew since his freshman year, but he played point guard as a freshman at South Carolina for Frank Martin. And as the years went on, he played a little bit more off the ball, became a bit more of a scorer, and is certainly not a point guard now. There's a reason he went undrafted. He wasn't going to be drafted as a point guard into the NBA, and we'll talk more about those skills here in a second. But he has some guard skills, but he really plays functionally more like a two-way wing, more of a 3-and-D type player, although he's not exactly a sharpshooter. I think when he came out of college, some of the concerns were the reason he wasn't drafted a couple of years ago. He played at South Carolina through the 21 season, so 18, 19, 19, 20, 20, 21 came out after his junior year. And some of the concerns were really he couldn't create his own shot that well, and he wasn't going to initiate an NBA offense. But he was a good defender, especially off the ball. There were some concerns about his on-ball consistency, but the athleticism is fantastic. He's very athletic, again, 6'6" with a really good 6'10" wingspan, plays really strong off-ball defense. All indications are that his basketball IQ is very strong, and he was able to catch and shoot a little bit at college. His three-point shooting percentages, as a freshman, he was almost 36%. As a sophomore, 34%. Then just a hair above 35% as a junior, his last season. So 34.9% over the course of his college career. He shot more threes each year. His three-point rate, his junior year, his last year in college, was up to 56.6, meaning that 56% of his shot attempts were threes at 35% clip. So you'd like the shooting numbers to be a little better. The form is pretty good. He shot the ball really well in Summer League, which we'll talk about in a minute for Dallas. But he can catch and shoot. He showed the ability to do that both in the G League last year as well as in Summer League and a little bit in college too. But he was both shooting off the dribble and catch and shoot was a pretty big piece of what South Carolina did a couple of years ago. But all of those areas that there were some concerns, creating his own shot, running an offense, defensive consistency, those are all areas that he clearly showed improvement both in the G League last season and then also in the Summer League. He was actually in training camp with the Hawks last year and was cut, but he played in the G League for them and for the College Park State Hawks or something like that. I might be making that up, but whatever. Actually, it's going to bother me. Look at it. I was close. College Park Skyhawks G League team for the Hawks. And played really well. He started basically the entire season, and it was a good G League team. He averaged 11.8 points per game, Shot 48% from the field in the G League last year, 34% from three on 4.5 attempts per game. Didn't get to the line a bunch and didn't shoot it well when he did. But one of the things I'm most excited about is that he's clearly showed an improvement on the rebounding, in the rebounding side of his game over the past, really since college. You look at what he did in college at his size. Granted, he was playing on the perimeter a lot, but the rebound numbers are really poor. A negligible offensive rebounding rate, a very low defensive rebounding rate. It's just disappointing, a little bit concerning. And one of the things, it's one of those the do stuff meter, right? You want guards to be able to rebound a bit. You want bigs to be able to get steals and blocks. Those are metrics, at least rate-based metrics, that tend to show through at the NBA level for college prospects. And he didn't do that enough in college. But last year in the G League, he did. He improved his rebounding rates in college. He almost doubled his offensive rebound rate in college, which was total under 3%. So he more than doubled it. It was 2.7%, 7.5% offensive rebound rate last year in the G League. The defensive rebound rate went from 12%, 12.4% in college to 15.5% last year in the G League. And that means his total rebound rate shot up from just 7.4% in college to a respectable 11.5% last year for a guy who played, again, a lot on the perimeter, initiated some offense, etc. But the rebounding improvement is real, or if it is real, it's significant. And I know that it's not what first comes to mind when you think about guys who played point guard in college, but at the NBA level, he's going to be one of these versatile, kind of flexible defenders that's got to play multiple positions. And after he played summer league with the Mavericks, he gave an interview for the Mavs Moneyball website and talked about his ability to guard 1 through 3, and he thinks 1 through 4. And knowing that that's his path in the league is to be a switchable defender. And like I mentioned earlier, he's a really good team defender. He's Canadian. He played with Team Canada for various, I think, like 16U, 17U type teams. And it just seems like international defenders a lot of times have a better understanding of the defensive team concept, helping out on the perimeter, Xing out to the perimeter to contest shots, picking up drivers from the weak side and just, rotating over, making the proper rotations. Those are all things he's going to need to do at the NBA level. And he showed the ability to do them in the G League last year. He did that in college too. It was really the on-ball stuff that he needed to improve on. And by all accounts, he really did that both last year in the G League and then in the summer league with 5 games with Dallas this year. In the summer league, he was kind of a standout. He averaged 16.6 points per game. That was South Carolina. He averaged 15.6 points per game and 6 rebounds per game for the Mavs across 5 contests. So really strong summer league. The catch and shoot was really evident there. The shot looked good. It's still maybe a little slow, a little mechanical, but it looked good and he looked comfortable. He showed some range. And if he could be a slightly above average shooter, but be a good on-ball defender, a very good team defender, and also remember, even though you don't want to initiate in your offense, he's not going to be a playmaker per se. It's valuable to have that experience that he ran point at a Division I, Power 5 school. He's got the ability to do that. So a well-rounded player who's a plus team defender and should be a little bit of a again, well-rounded offensively, like he can score off the dribble too. And the athleticism is really good too. That was the concern coming out of college, is that he was all athleticism, but the athleticism plus the basketball IQ, the feel. This is something else. If you watch summer league, what he did in summer league, his feel to find soft spots in the defense as a cutter, in the dunker spot, even he played a little bit there in summer in Vegas with the Mavs, finding open spots to spot up on the perimeter. Again, if he can knock down threes at a slightly above average clip, this is a really impressive signing for the Wolves. I think he's got a shot at finding some minutes this year. He's probably more ready to play right now, certainly than Josh Minott. Remember, Minott played 16 games or so at Memphis, 1 season at Memphis. AJ Lawson played 3 years of big college basketball. He played a little bit in Canada after that. He was in training camp with the Hawks. He played a full year in the G League, played a summer league. So AJ Lawson's got a bit more under his belt and is more well-rounded than a Josh Minott, and probably just as well-rounded as a Wendell Moore at this point. I am not suggesting he would necessarily play ahead of Wendell Moore, but there's a chance. So I think this is one of those 2 ways, kind of like Nate Knight was last year and could be again this year, where that signifies, I talked about this the other day on the show, the Wolves are now a contender. They're not just going to sign an upside play like a McKinley Wright last year, who was a fun local story and hopefully does stick in the league somewhere. They're not just going to sign guys that aren't really ready to play in the NBA. They're going to sign guys that can fill in and play when they're called upon. If this team has an injury outbreak or a COVID, hopefully not a COVID outbreak or whatever, they want guys that can be ready to step in and play a role. And AJ Lawson's a versatile defender, somebody who could play and guard multiple positions, could do a lot offensively, and a really good signing for the Wolves. Okay. Next, I want to talk more about the athletic top 125 rankings, where Rudy Gobert ranks, and in comparison to Ant and Cat, why it's a pretty interesting ranking. So let's do that next. First, let's talk about BetOnline. BetOnline.net is the fastest and easiest way to check in on all your betting needs. Find all your favorite sports and events at the #1 online source for odds, lines, and games. Find reviews and news of every league, including MLB, NFL, NBA, NHL, combat sports, esports, and even golf. BetOnline continues to be the top online resource for all your sports wagering information. From live in-game betting, scores and podcasts, and more, they have you covered. NFL preseason is like 3 weeks away. That's definitely on there. I guess we're post Summer League, post MLB All-Star game now, but MLB starts back up this weekend. NFL's just around the corner. Check out those futures. There's NBA futures on there now as well. Head to BetOnline today or use your mobile device to learn more about the action that's happening today. BetOnline, where the game starts. All right. So if you missed the show on, I guess it would have been Tuesday's show, I started talking about Seth Partnow's top 125 player rankings. If you're not familiar, I'm not going to rehash the whole explanation, but long story short, Seth Partnow at The Athletic, who was the director of basketball research for the Bucks for several years, and has obviously lots of front office intel and still knows people in front offices. He puts together his ranking of basically plus NBA players that are better than league average effectively, and puts them into tiers. So like players 185 to 125 are in tier 5, and they're all like slightly above average kind of starter type players who can impact winning at the NBA level. And then you go down from there to your borderline stars, your borderline all-stars, your borderline superstars. And then within each of these tiers, there's sub tiers A, B, and C in some of them. So on Tuesday, I talked about 3 of the Timberwolves' 4 players. D'Angelo Russell is ranked in tier 5 for the second consecutive season. Kyle Anderson just missed, by the way. He was in the rankings last year, fell out this year. We talked about Anthony Edwards and Karl-Anthony Towns both being in tier 3C, which is the 33 to 41 range. My take on that was that Ant was ranked maybe a little too high or a little higher than I expected, and Cat was a bit lower than I expected. Cat was down from tier 3B last year, so down just a handful of spots. Ant jumped all the way up from tier 5A, along with LaMelo Ball and some other young, exciting talents. So they're both in 3C in the 33 to 41 range. Well, that leaves us with Rudy Gobert. Where does the Timberwolves' newest superstar rank in Seth Partnow's ranking, and who's he ahead of besides his 2 teammates, Anthony Edwards and Karl-Anthony Towns? Rudy Gobert, despite the kind of his much maligned, I guess the stigma surrounding Rudy Gobert in the NBA, and we've all felt that. Timberwolves fans have felt that over the past couple of weeks, especially. Rudy Gobert finds himself in tier 2C, which means he's in the 15 to 19 range. Now, I've been kind of like offhandedly saying that the Timberwolves have 2 top 20 players. This validates what I said about Gobert, that he's a top 20 player, according to somebody who's very analytical, knows what he's talking about, has him in the top 20. Towns is in the 33 to 41 range. So I've been apparently, at least according to Seth Partnow, overselling Karl-Anthony Towns' ability and perhaps underselling Rudy Gobert. I've been kind of saying top 20, maybe top 25, hedging that a bit. And I guess 33 and 25 aren't that far apart when it comes to Cat. But fascinating that he basically just kind of flatly puts Gobert in that 2C range. Who else is in tier 2C? Well, here you go. Tier 2C, there's only 5 players in 2C. Again, that's the 15 and 19 range. And this is no particular order within the tier. Devin Booker, Rudy Gobert, Chris Paul, Paul George, and Damian Lillard. So Rudy's in the same category as, interestingly, another group of what we would call all Western Conference superstars, obviously in various stages of their career. And he's kind of like right in the middle of his prime, whereas Paul is obviously on the back end. George and Lillard are getting to the back end of their primes, and Booker's right on the front edge of his prime. So to see Gobert in that tier is really interesting. I want to talk a little bit about, well, first I'll read what Seth says about Gobert, and he actually has like a 3-paragraph write up on Rudy, and I think it's really fascinating because this is similar to what I've been trying to say about Rudy Gobert and where things get oversold regarding his play or lack of play, I guess, in the playoffs, according to some folks, or being played off the floor, quote unquote. So here's what Seth Partnow says at The Athletic about Rudy Gobert and his ranking. He says, quote, not that this is a metric that could be tracked, but Gobert might have the lowest respect of his peers to effectiveness ratio in the league, and I'm not entirely sure why. The Wolves' willingness to part with an unprecedented amount of draft capital and several decent players to acquire him suggests that disdain is not shared in front offices. The case for Rudy this high is simple. If he's on your team, you are almost assured of having a top 10 defense so long as he stays healthy. Even in a down year, Utah was 9th in non-garbage time defense, according to Cleaning the Glass. That the Jazz ranked even that low was much more a result of the time Gobert was off the floor. The Jazz were 8.4 points per 100 possessions stingier, so better with Gobert in the game. The 7th time in 9 seasons that their defense was at least 7 points per 100 possessions better with him on the floor. And then Seth goes on to say, are there questions about how well his defensive impact holds up in the playoffs? Sure, though I'd like to see what he looks like with non-turnstile perimeter defenders in front of him before declaring his usual impact null and void. Similarly, while there should be concerns about declines in production from an enormous human entering his age 30 season, we've yet to see much evidence of that, meaning a decline from Gobert. So the point is exactly the point I made about Gobert. I said this on Locked On NBA. I said this on anywhere that I've talked about this, and obviously on this show quite a bit. Utah's perimeter defenders were horrible. Donovan Mitchell had a horrible defensive season. Royce O'Neal was down. He was their best perimeter defender, and he wasn't that good last year. Old Mike Conley, is a bit of a turnstile. Bogdanovich, same thing. Jordan Clarkson, probably the worst of all of them. The Jazz just had a host of terrible perimeter defenders. And to ask Rudy Gobert to lift the entire defense, that's a ton of heavy lifting, and he did it for much of the season. So to ask him to do that in the playoffs against well-coached and very good teams with superstars is a really tough thing to ask. And so Partnow's point is exactly what I've been saying all along, is that the issue in the playoffs isn't Rudy. The issue is contain on the perimeter. The issue is Donovan Mitchell and Mike Conley messing up pick and roll coverage, not communicating, not trying some of the time, frankly, and asking Gobert to cover too, to guard the roller, to drop, and then also to dart to the corner and contest a three-pointer from Maxi Kleber. To ask him to guard Luka Doncic in a corner three-point shooter on the same possession is not a reasonable ask. So I think that, first of all, fantastic to see him ranked where he is. Second of all, the reason he makes a ton of sense. He's a walking top 10 defense, and that's something the Wolves haven't had, well, ever, in terms of a single play, well, other than Kevin Garnett in his prime, have not had a game-changing defender to this level since then. And they haven't had a top 10 defense I think since then as well. Fantastic to see that kind of hear from Seth, somebody who, again, knows people in the league. He even says, the fact that Seth Partnow says that the disdain, as he calls it, regarded by his peers, by Gobert's peers, by other players in the league. And we saw Anthony Edwards, we saw Patrick Beverley. Much was made of their post-game comments last year that they weren't scared of Rudy. They were more scared of Kristaps Porzingis and that whole thing. But front offices value Rudy Gobert. There were jokes about who are the Wolves bidding against for Gobert. Well, they're obviously bidding against somebody, and Utah didn't have to give him up either. There were other teams that wanted Rudy Gobert, and Partnow essentially says that here. He knows that NBA front offices value him because he was in an NBA front office and understands the impact that Gobert can have on the game. Whether or not players feel like he's having that impact or are willing to admit it, he absolutely does. I want to talk about the players that beat him out in the ranking and the rest of the top 125 here next, and then we'll put a bow on today's show. Which NFL stars move the betting line the most? Starting this week, Locked On gives us the top 50 most valuable players in the NFL from the odds makers at BetOnline. Again, all week at Locked On NFL. You can find that show wherever you get your podcasts and on YouTube. All right. The rest of that top 125 is what it ultimately is for Seth Partnow. Gobert's in that, again, that 15 to 19 range. So there's only 15 or 14 guys ranked ahead of Rudy Gobert in terms of the best players in the league. The tier right above him, interestingly, John Morant is in that tier, which is maybe a bit higher than I would have had John Morant. James Harden is still in that tier, although he's down from the first tier based on, obviously, some of the struggles he had last year. Trey Young also in that tier, maybe a bit higher than I would have expected Trey Young to be. After, frankly, I thought he was better a couple years ago than he was last year. And then Anthony Davis in that tier as well. So Trey Young, James Harden, John Morant, and Anthony Davis all in 2B. Tier 2A is only two players, Jason Tatum and Jimmy Butler, both in tier 2A. And then in the top tier, he's got, well, I guess there's further sub tiers: 1C, 1B, 1A. Kawhi Leonard and LeBron James in 1C, Joel Embiid and Luka Doncic in 1B. And then the top four players in the world, he's got Nikola Jokic, Giannis, Steph Curry, and Kevin Durant. Last year, tier 1A was only three players. It was Giannis, Kevin Durant, and LeBron. And 1B was Kawhi, Steph Curry, and Jokic. Interesting given that Jokic had won the and also James Harden, that Jokic had won the MVP last year as well. So I 100% agree with the top four. I don't know that you could really argue that the top four players in the league are Jokic in some order: Jokic, Giannis, Steph, and KD. And then Joel Embiid, I think it gets a little bit tougher there if you get into Embiid, Doncic, Kawhi, and LeBron, how you're ranking those guys. You could put Jason Tatum ahead of LeBron at this point. I think you could also argue Jimmy Butler ahead of LeBron at this point. Of course, we never got to really see LeBron last year, given the injuries and given what was, and I guess wasn't around him with the Lakers. So I think that the top, what is that, top eight? Top eight is correct, although you could argue for Tatum and Butler being slightly higher. Like I said, I think I'd have Trey Young and John Morant a bit lower, certainly behind. Well, I don't know. I guess if you're gonna have James Harden in that tier, then that I think that makes some sense. But that was kind of my only quibble there. And I think the tier that Rudy's in makes sense too, with Devin Booker, Chris Paul, Paul George, and Damian Lillard, and ahead of the guys at 3A: Drew Holiday, Jaylen Brown, Bam Adebayo, Chris Middleton, and Kyrie Irving. And again, Ant and Cat are both in that 33 to 41 range. So a dozen players or so below Gobert. So this exercise, if you have a subscription to The Athletic, is a ton of fun because, again, somebody who knows what they're talking about, more in depth than like the ESPN Top 100 voting, the other sites that all do it. And it's fun. And we'll talk about those when they get released. I think typically late August, early September. We'll absolutely talk about those rankings because they're also people that cover the league. There's players that get involved as well, I think, in the ranking at ESPN, if I'm not mistaken. But this is somebody who has apparently no bias, so should have no bias, is approaching this from an analytical standpoint and a front office perspective. So, summarizing, the Wolves have four guys in the top 125. Gobert in that 15 to 19 range, Towns and Edwards in the 33 to 41 range, and then D'Lo in that tier 5, the 85 to 125. Kyle Anderson just missing the cut. So they have four players and one that just missed. I would imagine that Jaden McDaniels isn't far off. Now, again, as good as he can be defensively, that hasn't completely converted to the analytics side. The metrics don't necessarily play that out, but there are some things defensively that certainly won't show up. And I think he's not far off from, checking some of those boxes on the analytical side. And again, his role offensively is relatively minor, and that plays into this too, where there are plenty of role players in tier 5. Jaden McDaniels doesn't have like that one skill that he's, a lights out shooter or a fantastic rebounder or, a big time bench contributor, anything like that. He's more of a well-rounded guy who plays really good defense. So don't be surprised if next year he finds his way into this list, even as really kind of the fifth option, the fifth wheel with this team, if you will, behind the four guys on this list. Jaden McDaniels is the next guy. Him and Kyle Anderson are going to be the next guys that the Wolves rely upon this year. So it'll be interesting to see if he does crack the list next year, 12 months from now. All right. That's all we have for you today here on the show. Thanks again for listening to Locked On Wolves, for making us your first listen each and every day. It's greatly appreciated. Of course, you can find this show anywhere you listen to podcasts. You can follow on YouTube, subscribe on YouTube, comment, like the video. It's definitely appreciated. You can also find this show on Apple, Google, Spotify, Odyssey, anywhere you listen to podcasts. You can follow on Twitter at Locked On T-Wolves and at Beecken with 2 B's, 2 E's, CKEN. Of course, the Locked On Wolves podcast is part of the Locked On Podcast Network. The Locked On Podcast Network is your local experts on all the biggest stories. A reminder that you can make your second lesson, the Locked On NBA show. You can get up to date on the latest news and rumors in the NBA in just 30 minutes every day with Locked On NBA. Again, Locked On NBA, your daily NBA update in just 30 minutes. Once again, I'm Ben Beecken. This is the Locked On Wolves podcast, and we'll catch you next time.